Hello and welcome. This is Heavy Business. I'm Aliyah.
I'm Curtis.
And I'm Holly.
And we are here to talk about PR today. I know this has been a topic we've gone over before, but if you haven't heard some of our episodes in the past, we want to take a fresh approach to it and really focus in on a specific direction in this episode today. So all three of us, we work at C Squared, and C Squared offers marketing and PR services to heavy bands of all levels. And we know that some people who listen to this podcast are just getting started and very DIY. So what we want to do today is kind of take you through a theoretical campaign that you could hypothetically put together yourselves. And yeah, to get things started, I wanted to kind of address the topic of finding blogs that are particularly relevant to a band's niche, to your niche as a band. But I think before we get into that, maybe we should do a quick little revisit on how you find your niche. Holly, can you give us some insight on how bands can kind of distinguish what their niches are?
Sure. I mean, there's kind of always the musical genre niche, so you can, so many bands nowadays sort of cross over genres and things like that, but most have a specific sort of direction that they're going in that is their main focus. So that's sort of a great way to start. You find the subgenre and the subculture of sort of your main sound and main inspiration and main influences, and then you can try and tap into them. So find bands who are similar and maybe introduce yourself to their fans and things like that, and you can sort of network that way. You can also do it with themes as well, because you get sort of so many sci-fi themed bands and fantasy and maybe D&D and stuff, but then also things like philosophy or literature or anything like that. So you can find ways to tap into slightly different audiences with the theme.
That's a good point. That's I didn't think about that, but yeah, the theme of your band is something, especially once you're getting into trying to niche down. Like you got your genre, which can be pretty specific, but also your themes can help hone that down. Curtis, you said you were just today doing this, looking for specific blogs that fit a band's niche. Can you talk a little bit about your process of deciding which blogs to really focus on for any particular band?
It's hard. So kind of what I usually do, and this is not a scientific approach at all. It's probably the laziest way that you can do absolutely anything. So I'll go look for a band that we've worked with, or that a band that has had press in the past. So let's say it's Disconnected Souls are really hard because they're hard to classify. So I'm going to say Shield of Wings because they're more epic, symphonic type thing. But let's say we were looking for press for a band for Shield of Wings. I would first Google a band that you guys are similar to, reviews, news items, interviews type thing. So it'd be like Shield of Wings, or not Shield of Wings because I'm looking for you. Let's say Nightwish interviews, Nightwish reviews, Nightwish news type things, or Nightwish last single that they did, or Epica, or whatever the heck it is. So that's what I do first, unless we have a band that's similar in style that we've worked with recently, in which case I will go through their past campaign and I'll start focusing on those ones for that band first, if that makes sense.
So, for example, Oriad was a recent client.
Yeah, so I told Holly right away, I said, look at Shield of Wings press, see who covered them. That would be your first hit point.
Right. So, yeah. So I guess if a band, though, is doing this on their own, they've obviously never run any campaigns for anyone else before.
It works the same way. So you would do Google, and then sometimes and the other thing too is a lot of times you're not going to find a lot of places even when you do that. Because if you're looking for a band again like Nightwish, they have a ton of big outlets that are going to mainly be popping up.
Yeah, Nightwish is honestly too big to be kind of referencing, I think.
Oh, well, that was the first band that popped in my head.
Well, no, let's talk through this process, right? Sure. So
So if it wasn't them, I'd probably go someone smaller. Now, I don't want to give away everything because obviously we do this for PR, for our own PR purposes and stuff like that. So first thing, and generally as a general rule, we also have those contacts already. The main thing is just finding out who's recently covered them. Because sometimes, for example, like if you're at Loudwire, if you want to reach someone at Loudwire, sometimes you'll find out that one of the writers has recently covered a symphonic band, for example, and that would be who you'd want to hit up first, right? So, but yeah, so if you're a newer band, you'd probably take something smaller. So, I don't know, who's a fairly B-level, C-level symphonic band, Aliyah, if you're...
I don't want to designate people as B and C level,
okay,
but like...
smaller than Nightwish, let's put it that way.
Definitely smaller than Nightwish is, well, I mean, everyone, but Epic is not that much smaller. So I guess if you wanted to go with like newer bands, Visions of Atlantis has been really taking off in the last couple of years with their recent album. So you could look at them.
Yeah, they're big, but not too big. Perfect.
Right.
That would be perfect. So if you did something like that, Visions of Atlantis, and you did reviews, you just looked at that, and you could start looking to see who has actually covered them. So the next step is going to be trying to find contact info and being able to actually pitch the person. So that's going to be a whole nother thing. But just the very first thing of finding out who is covered, that's the first step that I always do. Is I just look at past campaigns, or I go into Google and I go like similar sounding band or similar genre, and I just start looking at who's covered those in the recent past.
So let's say you're in like a kind of generic, not generic, but like a more broad genre. Let's say you're a thrash metal band.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go about figuring out outlets for that? Or is that almost easier because you can pitch anybody?
Well, you can a lot of the time. Okay. I think these are two separate questions, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because we might be conflating two different things. But so with a genre like thrash or symphonic metal or death metal or doom metal or anything like that, a lot of outlets will take all those genres, right? So it's not necessarily difficult to find an outlet to pitch. What I'm also talking about is like I'm looking for specialty genres and specialty outlets that focus on that. So like, for example, again, let's say we got Disconnected Souls, you got like a band that's kind of gothic, new metal-y comes along. I would look at the Disconnected Souls past reviews, past interviews, and I'd be like, okay, so this place has covered them, this place has covered them, this place has covered them, which are more specialized places, and I'd hit those ones up first, if that makes sense. Because like thrash is like a genre that almost every fucking site covers them pretty much. There's very few that don't. But then you could also do stuff like, you could also put to Google things like thrash metal reviews. You could do that in YouTube. You can do that on Facebook. You can do that on Twitter. There's so many different specialty outlets that are bits on the smaller side or just have a rabid fan base. You got to look and you got to search hard for them. But the main thing is just like looking to see where other people have been covered in the past as a first thing. For us, again, it's a little bit easier because as a general rule, we have contacts at almost all these places. So when you get into the pitching stage, it's going to be a bit harder. We are, again, just talking about the looking stage right now.
Right. So once you've made a list of blogs that you want to reach out to, hypothetically, how do you kind of intro your band and what's important to keep in your pitches? And I want to ask Holly this one because you are a really talented writer. If anybody's listening does not know, Holly writes most of our press releases, and she's a very talented writer. So, Holly, what's your insight on how to write a good pitch to a blog?
It's kind of well, thank you for tooting my horn.
Of course.
It's one of those where you kind of need to be concise enough that you're not sending a load of text that's just going to put someone off reading it, but also you're giving enough information so that they know what they're dealing with. I guess I sort of want to preface it and say journalists receive hundreds of emails. So unfortunately, you're probably not going to get a response to your email, or because what often happens is even the coverage that you do get, you don't necessarily get a personal email back saying, here's your review. It's kind of a one day it will appear on the website and you've got to look for it or look for tags on social media and things like that. So try not to take it personally if you don't get a personal response, because that's just sort of how it is. People are so busy, they don't really have time. You want to be polite. I would say use the person's name if you know it, because there are so many people who just send out sort of generic emails, and again, I understand that because it's a time thing, but at the same time, if you've never met someone before and never spoken to them, just sending a generic email sort of cold, it's not the best first impression, really. So try and, find their name, address them how they've, how they state their name, if they spell it differently or whatever. And just sort of be polite and say, what your genre is, who you are, what your release is, what it is you're promoting. And also, specify if you're asking them to do a review or if you want them to do an interview, or you could always sort of say, oh, it would be fantastic if you could review it, but we would really appreciate a feature or something like that. Because a little bit of direction helps, because sometimes you get emails from bands, or I get emails from bands, and I don't really know what they're asking me to do. It's like, are you asking me to review your music? Are you just sending it me because you think I might like it? Do you want PR? I don't know what's going on. So like direction is really helpful. And maybe if it's a journalist who's recently published some articles that you've read and you really like, you can always just say, oh, I recently read your article on thrash metal or whatever, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, don't be too buttery up, because there's a line, but there's nothing wrong with just sort of saying, I've read your work and I like
be
it.
honest. I hate it when someone has obviously not read something or listened to something. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, I love their playlist. Here's my pop metal song. Here's my pop song, rather.
Yeah, because it's fairly obvious when it's not genuine. So if you've not read any of their work, fine, but don't pretend that you have.
Don't say that you have.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess one important thing to do as well is like a link to your EPK or your press kit or your music. Different journalists will often ask for things in different formats, so pay attention. Like if someone says streaming only links, don't just send them a Dropbox download link with no streaming options. Don't use things like what's the one that expires after 7 days?
WeTransfer.
WeTransfer, yeah, don't use WeTransfer links, because people will often not get to the link in time and they won't download it, and then it's gone, and they won't bother because they're busy and they've got so much to deal with. But yeah, pay attention to the formats that certain journalists ask for. They will usually state, and the media websites usually state, we want streaming, or we want MP3s, or we want XYZ. So anything, have I missed anything, Curtis?
Well, here's the key thing. Like, this is my own opinion, and you guys can everybody can take it as it is. I don't think necessarily the pitch matters quite as much as maintaining a friendly relationship with the person that you're dealing with. And I know that's hard when you're not a PR. But honestly, any of the three of us, we can approach numerous people, and all we got to do is just say we have a band that has is in X genre, and we'd like you to check them out. And that's the simplicity of the pitch, and that's probably more like 90% of the time. But on a straight cold pitch, everything Holly said is 100% accurate and 100% true. But I cannot stress the importance of like actually staying in touch with people, and because that's really the key. Because it always comes down to who and keeping in touch with people versus anything else. Because you can have the best pitch in the world, but if the person doesn't know who you are, you might give a bad first impression with the reline. It could be anything, too much text, like Holly said, too short. But also a lot of journalists will just look at the inbox, look at who the email's from, and if they don't know who you are, they're just going to delete it. Doesn't matter how good your pitch is. So like Aliyah could be pitching, somebody at Pitchfork, but if they don't know her, delete. And she has this great, beautiful pitch. So sorry, Holly, I'm not knocking anything you said. I'm just saying the pitch, in my opinion, is always secondary to the person knowing who you are.
It's an interesting point, yeah, because I think it's always worth following, if you're a band and you have social media, which you should do, follow journalists on social media, interact with them, like their post, comment, obviously do it
But
genuinely.
don't be a dweeb.
And don't start arguments on posts. Don't be an asshole, because no one's going to want to cover you if you're being, unpleasant on social media. It doesn't look good.
You look beautiful, Holly. Don't say that.
Don't do that. Oh yeah, don't comment on people's appearance. Don't comment on people's kids. Don't comment on people's, I don't know, partner or whatever. It's weird. Keep the working relationship boundary kind of thing. If you become best friends with someone, great, sure, but not when you've never met them.
Yeah, keep it to commenting on their music.
The only reason why I brought up the
music and work focused and stuff. Yeah.
The only reason I brought up the appearance is I actually lost coverage for a client one time because the client decided to tell the female journalist that she was beautiful, thinking it was going to butter her up. And I was just like, yeah. And I was just like, what are you fucking doing?
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah. So anyways, just commenting on that.
Yeah, I mean, these are all really good tips on finding the blogs and pitching the blogs. And a good point Curtis made is like you needing to be known, because all of our inboxes are flooded, and yeah, it's hard to get even heard. So on that note, what do you advise for how people can be heard?
Well, I'm going to toot both of your horns really quickly, especially because Aliyah's been very active with Shield of Wings recently, as has Holly. Not with Shield of Wings, with this metal sauce. That came out really fucking weird. So you two both especially, you keep in touch. You guys post all the time. I believe you both answer your messages. You sure seem to answer comments, at least on Instagram. It looks that way, at least to me. So unless I'm missing something completely, because I don't know what your inboxes look like, but it appears to me like you both interact with people. You respond when someone comments, you at least heart it or do like a little emoji or something like that. Honestly, that's the best way of doing it. Granted, both of you also know PR, so I understand that. But at the same time, this isn't rocket science. Just keeping in touch with people, responding to comments if they comment to you, saying something nice in return, that type of thing. Honestly, that's the best way of doing things. And also, one thing I do want to point out that Aliyah has been really good with recently, I've noticed. Really good with recently. Like, she will comment on people's posts, but she does it as Aliyah, not as Shield of Wings, which I think is a very good thing to do, because she also has Shield of Wings in her bio. And I know you're not doing this as a tactic or anything like that. I fully am aware. I am fully aware this is not a tactic, and I'm not saying to use this as a tactic. But one thing I think is really smart is when Aliyah is interacting with journalists and other bands, she's posting as herself. She's not posting from the band account.
I never really thought about that. I mean, that's just because I am myself, and I'm
That's
speaking as myself.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean. If you're interacting as the band, it looks like you're up to something and that you're trying to do something. Do you know, even if you're not?
I suppose, yeah.
Yeah. Like, that's the way it looks like to me. Like, if I have a band account interact with me, I'm a little bit more sus all the time rather than a personal person.
Yeah, the one exception would be like if you're tagged in something,
yeah, of course,
or what,
of course.
If like the post is about your band, you should comment with your band. And on that, actually, I want to talk a little bit about following up on coverage, and what bands should do to kind of you might get like a few smaller blogs or accounts posting about your music, and what can bands do to kind of enhance that, or take that and take advantage of that opportunity to make their music more public.
Go, Holly.
I mean, I'd always like, share, comments on any coverage, comments, press, anything you get. I mean, even if it's just on social media, because there's a lot of blogs and a lot of individuals who will just share your music when it's released. And that's a huge thing. That's a great way, because you can then tap into their followers and things like that. So always interact with posts and share them, especially on Instagram. It's super easy to share these things to stories and stuff like that, and tag people where relevant. And that's just a really sort of easy way to get networking a little bit and more people seeing you. I sort of, it amazes me how many bands don't do that. And I appreciate sometimes when you're busy and you're working as well, it's tricky, but it's it can be sort of like a huge reward, because you never know, your next super fan might just see you by sharing something. So
Yeah, and it's also just courteous. These people spent time to either, maybe you can't do it for every repost of your press release, but especially if they've done a review or an interview, they've taken time out of their days to make that piece and publish it. So if the least you can do is say a little thank you.
Yeah, and journalists will remember that. If you say thank you and like and share their stuff, they will remember that next time you've got a single or an album or whatever it is, and then they're more likely to cover you again. So it's this sort of relationship building that Curtis was mentioning earlier. That's the really easy way to sort of help with that.
I think one thing that Holly does really well at, and Holly, I'm sorry if this embarrasses you, but I'm going to say it anyways. You come across as extremely kind in your postings. I don't know if you're aware of that, but
I have no idea.
You do. You come across as extremely kind whenever you're doing posts, and you come across as being a genuine person when you do it. And Aliyah is really good at coming across as being extremely friendly as well. A bit more conversational than Holly is, but at the same time, I think that's something that you guys both do really well with your band accounts. Not band accounts, with your personal accounts rather. And I think that kind of gets more people to check out the band accounts as well. Because I know, Holly, I know you're not like a big conversationalist, but you come across as super warm, and Aliyah comes across as more of the conversationalist and warm at the same time. I don't know if it's intended for other.
I don't know that you're articulating. I'm not sure what you're articulating.
I'm saying you come across as being someone conversational is all I'm saying. And Holly just comes across as just being straight up kind. And I think those are both good traits for both of you guys. And if you guys don't like it, it's fine. I'm just saying.
But it is like approachable, the word maybe.
Well, Aliyah's probably more on the Aliyah's conversational / approachable.
Oh,
and you're kind and approachable, probably, yeah. But kind is, I think, is the more thing that I'm looking at.
Well, people didn't come here to listen to nice things about us. We're trying to tell them
Meanwhile,
how to
I'm just embarrassing the crap out of you too. Whatever.
How to do your own PR campaign. If you are set on that, it's definitely a lot of work. And I think it's important, though, to do some level of PR for your music, whether you hire out or you do it yourself. It's just a shame if you put music out and it doesn't get heard because you didn't do the work to get it into the right people's ears. So this is kind of a shorter episode. We've done a lot of posts about PR and episodes about PR in the past, doing yourself and that sort of thing. So if you want to take a listen back to some of our other episodes, I will link them in the show notes. But if this all seems a bit too overwhelming to you, or you want a little bit of help with PR, reach out to Curtis or Corey or Holly or me. I'll redirect you. I'm mostly just a podcast person now, but I can answer some questions. Yeah, Curtis, do you want to say anything about that?
All I gotta say is, if you do reach out, make sure you include your MP3s. You also include your release dates, if it's a single or an EP. Just give us some information. One thing I really don't like is when someone just reaches out and they say, "Hey, what can you do for me?" Because I don't know. We won't take clients if we don't believe that we can get them any coverage. So you got to make sure you're clear on that. And if you don't have the tracks yet, but you're going to the studio, for example, and you just want to see if we're going to be available, you can always send older tracks for now. Because we got to be we can't just take everyone, because if we don't think the music's up to par or it's not the right genre, there's no point in really getting into a conversation. So make sure that you send the MP3s and any other info that you got.
Yeah. And also one thing we didn't really touch on is the amount of time that's needed to run a PR campaign. Holly, do you want to briefly go over about the timeline of when you need to start delivering things to us if we were to run a PR campaign in relation to the release of the album?
Sure. So with an album, a sort of a general rule of thumb is the PR campaign would be 3 months prior to the release date. So then ideally you need to get materials to us, as in the final MP3s and art and everything, say maybe 4 months in advance, just so that we've got time to check everything and put together a really good press kit. And then we can also plan out the schedule in terms of any singles and extra little bits, so we know the timings on everything. The reason it has to be so far in advance is just because so many sites and outlets run so far in advance. So if you want to have a chance at print media, you've got to be at least 3 months, because there is, the time of them writing the magazines and then physically printing them and producing them. And same with sort of online, there are schedules, journalists run several weeks ahead often, so everything has to be done in advance. So that's why. But the earlier the better, and in certain circumstances even longer campaigns do actually be very beneficial. So
yeah. Good points. Well, everyone listening, hope you learned something, and thank you for listening. And until next time, make like a bull and throw those horns up.